You know, sometimes at these author talks, we get the timing right, and this is definitely one of those times. We're very fortunate to have Stuart with us this evening. He is, of course, an experienced political consultant and former campaign manager a number of times over. In addition to being an accomplished author of novels and travel books and TV screenplays. His new novel, The Innocent Have Nothing to Fear, is a dark comedy set at a contested Republican National Convention and features two candidates vying for the presidential nomination. One candidate is a populist, anti-immigrant, law and order type. Sound familiar? The other is a more reasonable, conventional Hillary-like character. And what unfolds is a tale that no doubt seemed to Stuart at the time it was conceived to be a sufficient dramatization of reality to provide some comic relief and divert us from the unbelievable political drama we're experiencing these days. Of course, the challenge facing any writer of political fiction nowadays is to imagine plots that could actually top all that's transpiring before our incredulous eyes. Stuart finished his novel more than a year ago when a Trump candidacy still seemed like a bad joke, and he brought considerable experience and formidable talents to the task. As a veteran of the George W. Bush and Mitt Romney campaigns, as well as campaigns for many governors and members of Congress, Stuart writes with an insider's knowledge of what really happens behind the scenes and why political operatives do the things they do. And he writes with wit and an observant, entertaining knack for storytelling. The narrator of his book is a campaign manager. It's the one for the Hillary-like character. And looking at things from that perspective is really fun and informative. I suppose Stuart could have tried telling the story from the vantage of the manager for the Trump-like character, although that might have been harder for him since he's been a vocal member of the Never Trump movement. Anyway, as eager as Stuart is to talk about his book, I have a feeling he'd be happy to offer a few thoughts, if asked, about what just happened in Cleveland and what's about to happen in Philadelphia. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Stuart Stevens.
Thanks for coming. It's been a depressing week. I always had this not very realistic hope, but hope that somehow Donald Trump wouldn't be the nominee. You know, as I said, I started this book way before the Romney campaign. And at the time, it was apparent sort of the subterranean plates, I think, of the politics, particularly in the Republican Party, and I wanted to write to that. And I wanted to sort of push it out to the edge for comic effect in part, and also in that sort of Swiftian way of making us look at something that hadn't happened, that could happen. But I thought it was very important that it seemed realistic. So I posited it in the near future after another economic crash. I thought that an economic crash would make the emergence of this character, Armstrong George, who's this very, he's a populist. He's actually a governor of Colorado, who emerges on this anti-immigrant, rewrite the Bill of Rights wave of populist anger. And I thought we'd need unemployment, you know, in the teens and the sense of impending doom to make that believable. As it turns out, we didn't, because we got Donald Trump. But I'm glad I didn't try to top what's happening now, because I think it would have seemed too much, sort of a bridge too far. You know, the other part of my life, I write for television a lot, and I was talking to this friend of mine at HBO, and we were laughing about it. We said, you know, like, if we're writing something for HBO, we had a candidate, and we said, like, what if he attacked the Pope? He go, like, no, you can't do that, man. Nobody's going to attack the Pope. But Donald Trump did, and somehow in the most religious state in the country, one of the most religious, South Carolina, he got away with it. But it's I think, a dark moment in our politics. I hope it's a transitory moment. But I just wanted to read a little bit from the book, and I'll just kind of set this up a bit more. The book takes place during a Republican convention in New Orleans, and I believe all conventions should be in New Orleans. It's like the Olympics; they should all be in one place. I like that because I like beginning, middles, and ends, and I like ticking clocks, and I like sort of compressed time frames. And I half grew up in New Orleans, so I know it. And the '88 Republican convention was in New Orleans. But it opens on the eve of the convention. And this is a section where the narrator, this is told in first person, J.D. Callahan, and his top aide, this guy, Eddie Basha, go to a pre-convention rally of Armstrong George, this, as it turns out, sort of Donald Trump-like character. In the last 12 hours, I've been to a bomb site and a political rally, and I'd be lying if I didn't say the political rally terrified me more, a lot more. It had been several hours before the bombing, as the big pre-convention Armstrong rally held in Tulane University's football stadium. As college stadiums go, it wasn't so big, with seating for about 30,000. Hell, Alabama's Bryant-Denny Stadium held over 100,000. But for a political event, a Republican political event, 30,000 was a massive crowd. And it wasn't just 30,000 bodies. It was 30,000 screaming, maniacal Armstrong George fanatics. Eddie Basha and I took the streetcar up St. Charles to Tulane, and walked over, surrounded by the George faithful. It was dusk, and we were both wearing baseball caps and George sweatshirts with cut-off sleeves, and nobody gave us a second look. We passed through the high-tech bomb detectors set up outside the entrance and found a place on the ramp to the stadium. The big halogen lights lit the green field brighter than the hazy day that was fading, and in the middle of the field there was a small stage. That was it. No elaborate props or staging. Up on the Jumbotron, videos played of Armstrong George bus tours, his slogan, "Take America Back," emblazoned on the bus. Were this a Hilda Smith rally, that's his candidate, we would have had a band on stage and introductory speakers, probably the most popular local Paul we could get, and somebody from the area who'd repeat a theme for the message of the day we were pushing. A teacher, an unemployed worker, maybe a female entrepreneur or a veteran. I was a big believer in the Khrushchev effect, that early 20th century Russian film experiment that took the same shot of an actor and surrounded it with different images. When you see it, you think the expression of the actor is changing, while it's actually static. The point being that viewers had different reactions based on who and what went before and after. You could take the most unempathetic candidate and surround him or her with happy school kids, and unless the candidate started actually hitting the kids or screaming at them, odds were he would look warmer, and voters would talk about how he really cared about kids. Same with seniors, or minorities, or women, or you name it. I once tried to explain to a candidate what the Khrushchev effect was, and they looked at me like I was insane. Later, Eddie Basha told me, "Look, don't ever do that again. Don't tell them what you're doing, just do it." It was good advice. We did that all the time with Hilda Smith, who had a natural Yankee aloofness that read cold, which in truth was pretty accurate. She was cold by the standards of most hug you until you can't breathe, let me cry with you for a while politicians of the new school. But since turning to Armstrong George and calling him out in that debate in New Hampshire, she had come to represent something that was still important to a lot of people in a beat-up country. Call it dignity or decency. At an ugly time, Armstrong George had marshaled the ugliness within us all. It was a deep, burning anger at the large forces that controlled our lives. It was probably close to the religious fervors that swept across the country in the late 1800s. Hilda Smith stood for a different kind of country, one that wasn't seething with anger. Our bet was that something about Armstrong George made you feel worse about yourself and your country, that his calling for a new Bill of Rights and a new constitutional convention was radical, not conservative. But it was a close thing, and that's why we were down to fighting over a handful of delegates. As the sky darkened and the field grew bright under the lights, the music swelled, and then suddenly there was Armstrong George, bursting from the locker room tunnel trailed by his son, Summerfield George. The two looked eerily alike, both tall and sturdy, with big, square Protestant faces that looked like they came from a WPA mural of the wheat farmers who had tamed the prairie, which is what the Georges had done. They were not from the mountainside of Colorado, but the flat plains that resembled the heartland in geography and belief. There were no fireworks or razzle-dazzle tricks as Armstrong and his son walked toward the simple stage. But the crowd went absolutely crazy, their yells and applause growing louder the closer the Georges got to the stage. Armstrong George bounded up the steps, took the mic in one hand, and detached it from the stand. No fancy headset for him. He wanted to work the mic the old-fashioned way and let rip. Americans, he cried, this is our moment. It was chilling. The crowd went from fever pitch to berserk. Are you with me? Are we together? Are we Americans? Eddie leaned into me and whispered, he's big on this American thing. It was more a shout than a whisper. The stadium was so loud. George continued, these have been dark days in America. Our beacon has been dimmed but not extinguished. Within each of you glows the fire to reignite the torch of American genius and greatness. You are our future. God help us, Eddie groaned, looking around at the crowd. It's 1930s Nuremberg. I waved him off. I was there to see Armstrong George. Every time I saw him, I got some different perspective. I'd snuck into a dozen of his rallies over the past 6 months. You are the founding fathers of tomorrow, George said in a suddenly low, intense voice, so the crowd leaned forward. I say to you that, like the founding fathers before us, now is the time we must seize today and control our own destiny. It is time for a new Bill of Rights. It is time for a new beginning. Then the shout went up from a woman in the crowd. I would have bet anything she was a plant, but it was picked up, and soon the whole stadium was chanting in unison, America for Americans, America for Americans, America for Americans. Armstrong George took a step back, put his arm around his son, and waved. Jesus Christ, Eddie sighed. Jesus H. Christ. We're doomed. I was thinking about this last night watching Trump's speech, which I thought was a shockingly bad speech. You know, usually you can, when you know you're going to give a speech as you like that, you can put together something that is pretty good. I thought Governor Pence's speech was, you know, not great, but it was okay. But it was really, I think, the darkest speech we've had in, you know, modern American politics. It's fascinating because he's talking about crime and how terrible the country is, and I personally don't think it's going to resonate. 'Cause I just don't think people feel that way. But it really is, for someone who's worked in the Republican Party, particularly dispiriting, because he's really the anti-Ronald Reagan, I think. Because like Armstrong George, you know, he speaks to that side of us inside that really feels cheated, or that one time we didn't get our due, or something inside us that makes us feel like, you know, we weren't treated fairly. And he's going to go out and settle the score for us. You know, with I think is really out of the American tradition. And his answer of being a strongman, I think, is starkly out of the American tradition. You know, in the 30s, while a lot of Europe was turning to a strongman or totalitarian government, the United States always resisted that, and I think in part because of our leaders. I don't think it'll work. As P.J. O'Rourke wrote this great piece for the Daily Beast, and I love P.J. He said, you know, Hillary Clinton's awful, but she's awful within the normal parameters. And Donald Trump is a flying monkey. But I think that Trump will lose and lose badly if you just look at the internal dynamics of it. But I don't know what that'll mean. I think that he's already hurt the country a lot by running, because he's normalized or attempted to normalize areas of speech and discussion that we as a country had decided was beyond us. And it's no surprise that he's gotten such support from so many, they like to call themselves white nationalists, which I really don't understand why we let them do this when they're just racist. But I don't think it'll work. I've worked for the last 5 presidential races, and for a Republican to win now is incredibly difficult in the national scene. If you think about it, it's sort of amazing, but the last time Republicans could celebrate winning the presidential race on election night was 1988. I mean, in 2000, it took 31, 32 days. In 2004, we didn't know till the next day because of Ohio. And it's there's sort of this myth, I think, within a lot of the Republican Party that we should have been easy to win in 2012, and that if only Republicans can get more white voters, we can win. It's nonsense. In 1980, Ronald Reagan won a sweeping landslide with 57% of the white vote. In 2012, Mitt Romney got 59% of the white vote and lost. And it's what I call the lost tribes of the Amazon theory. That they think that if we just paddle the canoe up far enough and beat the drum loudly enough, these lost tribes of white voters will come to the riverbank and vote. They're just not there. If you take the percentages of Ronald Reagan in each demographic and apply it to the likely 2016 electorate, Reagan gets crushed. And what's particularly distressing about this is after 2012, the Republican Party, to its credit, I think, went through this process of looking at what it should do and came to reasonable conclusions. I didn't agree with all of them, but reasonable, which all boiled down to, you have to appeal to more non-white voters. And now the party's done exactly the opposite. So I think Trump will lose, but I don't know what it'll mean. I don't know if parties are learning organisms. I really don't know. And I've been very disappointed at those who know that Trump shouldn't win, who are saying that they're for him with the hope that he won't win. But anyway, so questions or anything about this? You must have questions now. Yes? Okay. Okay. But since we've been here, has Hillary Clinton announced her vice president yet? No? Go ahead.
I did my best for the country. I took a Republican to the James Carville roast at the Kennedy Center. Your former boss Mitt has pretty much said that that Trump's tax returns are going to be scandalous.
Yeah.
Is he going to do anything to?
Well, he's kind of done everything.
Listen,
I think you can like Mitt Romney or not like Mitt Romney, but I think he's played a near heroic role here. It's very unusual for someone to step out and criticize their own party. There's nothing positive about it for Mitt Romney. He's done it as an act of conscience. Mitt's a pretty smart guy and has looked at the Trump tax situation as best one can without, and talked to some other people. And you sort of have to come back to, Donald Trump is someone who has publicly talked about dating his own daughter and doesn't seem to bother him. So there's something in those taxes that are so bad that even Donald Trump thinks they're disqualifying. I suspect it's sources of income, and I suspect that he paid 0 federal income tax because of depreciation. And I would not be surprised if, just as we had this WikiLeaks hack on the Democratic emails, tax returns go through a lot of people's hands. I mean, they go to tax accounting firms. There's a lot of people who work there. I would not be surprised if it didn't leak out. That's just a pure guess, but it wouldn't shock me.
Knowing what you know now, since you finished this
It's
a year
always a
ago,
dangerous opening.
what major changes would you have made?
Oh, well, I don't think that you needed to have an economic crash to set this as a triggering factor. I don't know if I would have done it. I kind of like the economic crash because it's kind of fun. And I think it's interesting to think about what could happen. But I think it's, I've played it pretty much down the middle for what would happen. In the book, I probably should have set this up earlier. On the eve of the convention, someone starts setting off bombs in New Orleans, which is terrible for the narrator's candidate because she's sort of hope versus fear. And he's from New Orleans, and he hates the fact that the convention is in New Orleans because he has to deal with his family. But he becomes convinced that this sort of crazy half-brother that he has, may be setting off the bombs. So he has to find his brother and try to stop him, not only because he wants to stop him setting off bombs, but also because it was terrible for his candidate. Because in that environment, in the same way you see Trump today trying to play up Munich, the shooting, it was a terrible environment if they're trying to offer hope, not fear.
Do you think, despite Trump's wackiness, there might be a silver lining to his candidacy?
I hope so.
In that
Yeah.
it's kind of shaken up the two-party stranglehold that our country has been in, and then maybe it'll open the door to somebody else that's less conventional, but maybe
could do that's
maybe
listen,
more effective.
I'm going to hold on to that idea for the next couple of months because it'll help me sleep at night. I have no idea. There's nothing in the Constitution about parties, and parties are really they're like bowling leagues. They're just collections of people that think alike or think that they think alike, like-minded people. It's very difficult structurally now for an independent to win. But there's no reason the party couldn't split at all. I mean, this is going to be a real test. At face value, Donald Trump is against everything pretty much Republicans have stood for or said they were for. I mean, just to the degree he has policy to policy. I mean, the 45% tariff, cuddling up with Putin. He's for a religious test. The Muslim ban is the nuttiest thing. It's not a ban on Muslims. It's a religious test for everybody. Because how do you tell if someone's Muslim if you don't know what they are? I always think about, so what happens if Cat Stevens shows up at Heathrow and says, well, I'm not a Muslim anymore. I'm a Quaker. What are they going to do? They're going to, ask him questions about William Penn or something? I mean, I talk to Quakers. I don't get Quakers. So it's absurdity. And if we started demanding a religious test, then it would be natural for other countries to demand a religious test. So then you'd have to go and register. I mean, it's the most fundamentally un-American idea imaginable. Our country is founded on religious freedom. I don't know. I think Trump is the most dangerous person I've met in politics, and I worked against a guy in the Congo who was convicted of war crimes recently. He wouldn't have had nuclear weapons if he won. So I don't know. I hope that's the case.
Just a follow-up observation, I think it's interesting how well Bernie Sanders did on the other side. And that's kind of consistent with
it's
the
a really
fact
good
that
point.
the two-party system is
if it were not for Trump, Bernie Sanders
on both sides
would be it's a phenomenal story. I mean, I went to Middlebury College in Vermont, and I've known Bernie since he ran for mayor. Not really known him, but watched him. I can remember riding my bicycle down Church Street, the main street in Burlington, and Bernie was out there yelling about rent control. The guy won the mayor's race by 10 votes when he ran, and no one could believe that he won. But say what you will about Bernie, he has an organized view of the world, and he believes what he says. And I think he's dead wrong, but he's not a politician of opportunity. And he's only been a Democrat. I mean, the fact that he did so well in the Democratic primary, he's only been a Democrat about as long as it takes milk to spoil. And he raised the idea that Bernie Sanders could raise this kind of money is staggering. And there's been sort of a truism that sort of center-right likes to bat about the last 7 years, and that is basically it goes like this. So the country's basically still a center-right country. But after the Bush, the wars, the economic crash, Bush fatigue, you had this incredibly charismatic candidate in Barack Obama. The country voted for Barack Obama even though he was more liberal than they were. And statistically, polls will show that people think that Barack Obama, majority of people think he's more liberal than they are. But that after the Obama years, we kind of reset to more of a center-right. But I think the exact opposite is proving true. I mean, if you look at the Sanders-Clinton race, in many ways they were running against Bill Clinton in 1992. And I think the country's actually, I wrote a piece about this for the New York Times, I think the country's actually more left in a lot of ways. But, as we stand here, Bernie Sanders is the most popular politician in America, next to the president. Most politicians who's been running for office. That's pretty amazing. Bernie Sanders. And if you want to step back and look at it in the context, you could say there's been other center-left candidates that have emerged in Europe and Canada now, and it could be part of a larger sort of drift. I don't know.
Thanks.
No, that's good.
I have a couple questions going,
Yeah, sure.
a question going off of that. There's been a couple rumors over the last couple of days that Jeb Bush is considering endorsing the Libertarian ticket of Gary Johnson.
I hadn't heard
and
that.
Bill Wells. Yeah, it's unclear, but regardless, I mean, they are. There's two former Republican governors on that ticket. I think both would be considered closer to traditional conservatism than Donald Trump. What are your thoughts about them, and are you surprised?
Well, I did all of Bill Wells' races.
Yeah.
1990. This is going back, but I worked for him in '90 when I was coming up, and they hadn't elected a Republican governor in 25 years in Massachusetts, and he ran against a guy named John Silver, who was in some ways sort of a Trump-like character, though a lot smarter. He was at Boston University, but he was an angry guy, and we were behind the entire race. But we ultimately turned it with this phrase that Weld used, what if he's not just mad at them, he's mad at us? And it made people really think, like, do you really want someone this angry? I love Bill Weld. I've spent a lot of time with him in a lot of situations. I did Weld Carey, where we did 13 debates, which is probably one of the most epic moments in modern politics. I would say he has the most elegant mind, I think, one of the 2 or 3 most elegant minds I've ever encountered. When he graduated from Harvard, he gave the commencement speech from memory in Greek in a bunny suit. He has this air about him, or manner, that is sort of this classic WASP thing of sort of effortless grace. Like he's never really going to try very hard. And in fact, he works incredibly hard. Gary Johnson, I don't know. But, he climbed Everest, which I have a lot of respect for and find kind of amazing. I wish the ticket was reversed for a lot of reasons. One, I think I like Will more because I know him better. But also, I think the danger of the Johnson-Weld ticket is that if it became a safe harbor for Bernie voters, and bled off Bernie voters, if you believe, like I do, that Trump's a danger. Whereas Weld would be more classically conservative on economics and other issues. I don't know. The reality is it's so difficult for a Republican to win now. And you look at the margins of what you need. I mean, look, as we joked in 2000, sort of joked, after the whole thing was over, like anybody can win the presidency when you get more votes. It takes professionals when you lose by 500,000. And then in 2004, if 70,000 votes in Ohio had gone the other way, we would have been idiots. We were always very aware of that. If you have a candidate who just takes 2 or 3% in a couple of states that would have gone to Trump, it blocks a path for him. And I just don't know what will happen. How Johnson will end up defining themselves. The threshold would be they should be in the debates, whether or not they get into debates. I think they should be in the debates, but that's another whole subject. I don't know. But I think if Jeb did it, I hadn't heard that, but that could push a lot of people that way. Or not, make it more acceptable to do it.
Yeah, I mean, if I may, are you surprised at all that the many prominent Republicans that have said they're not going to vote for Trump and they don't want to vote for Hillary, that they haven't, considered
Well, I think,
them?
The stuff about the libertarians is just so nutty, like we shouldn't fight any wars. And, the convention was kind of an amusing freak show. I think it's all, Gary Johnson, who once said that, he's abstaining for 7 weeks from smoking dope. It's just kind of a hard thing to wrap your mind around, I mean, if you're like, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to be for, if Gary Johnson's going to make a sacrifice like that, I'll be for him. I think that's Falwell would be an easier on-ramp if he were the head of the ticket, people forget in 2012, Gary Johnson was in the first Republican debate. Romney didn't do the first one, and he was good. He was good in it. I don't know. My bet is that they'll do better in September than the last week of October. I think people tend to do it. There's Prose, but Prose had a lot of money, and they're not raising any money. So I don't know.
Hi. Going back to your book, you had a scene with the candidate walking out with his son. Mm-hmm. And that struck me, that reminded me of what we've seen in this Republican convention.
I hadn't thought about that, yes.
And in your mind, there must be some creative connection to the populist and having his family around. I just wondered if you'd talk about that, and also
that's interesting. Yeah.
Also talk about in your experience what you've had in terms of family advisors with a candidate, and then project out. These are people you cannot fire if they are your closest
it's a problem.
Advisors. Yeah. Where does that lead?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. My experience has been that every candidate has a different attitude toward their kids, and all the kids have different attitudes. I remember in '99 when I went down to Austin to do the Bush campaign, the Bush twins were graduating from this large, 40% Hispanic public high school, and I was like, hey, great, we should make spots about this, and Bush was like, I'll kill you. No way, off limits. And we never did anything with the kids. And later, when they kind of had teenage problems, it was, I think the press respected the fact that of sort of more zones of privacy because they hadn't been put out. I mean, I think it's when you get in trouble, it's when you try to have it both ways. You say, vote for me because I have these great kids, but then don't do any personal stuff. I mean, I think this happened with, if you go back to Bill Clinton's '92 acceptance speech, where he went out there and said, I've got this druggy stepdad and a drunk stepdad and my druggy brother, and here are all these personal reasons that you should validate me for being president. And then when other personal stuff came up he didn't want to talk about, he's like, well, we need zones of privacy. I think it's sort of easier to have it one way or the other. John Kennedy never said vote for me because I had this sort of domineering father, and he really loved my older brother more. It was like, there's a missile gap, vote for me. And I think a different era, but that also was reflected more zones of personal privacy. Once you open that, I think it's difficult. I've never had bad experience with kids. The Romneys have these 5 sons, and it's fascinating because they're all very, very different, and they've all gone in different directions professionally. None of them in a direction that would have been paved by their father, unlike the Trump kids. I don't know the Trump kids really. They seem like, great, nice kids. I've been a little bit sort of, I don't know, the idea that they're being praised for being normal or something, or not being whack jobs. They're not the Mendez brothers, But I mean, they had every advantage in life, and I don't think as a society it's very helpful if we say, you know, those who have every advantage, we should be astonished that they, you know, aren't terrible people. But it's, I know for a fact that in the convention planning, I had friends who are working inside the convention. Doing these conventions is just so much monumental amount of work, more than people ever realize till you do it. And I never really was a convention guy. My partner, Russ Schrieffer, did the 2004 and 2012 conventions. But they had this tremendous problem this last time that ended up hurting them, that every decision had to be approved by the kids. And, you know, like most siblings, they couldn't agree on everything. And they always also had these kind of fantastical ideas, which happens, like we should get the Rolling Stones. Like, well, it's not going to happen. And it really hurt those who were trying to put together the program to sort of execute. I don't, you know, I don't know what role they would play. You know, the Romney kids were fantastic. You know, they're funny. They love to give their father a hard time. They like each other, you know, and but they never, you know, I think they were happy if their dad won. They realized that probably their life would be better if he didn't. And none of them are looking to be in the spotlight. And they mostly were around to kind of help out, you know, make their parents feel better and help out and give some sort of sense of normalcy to the path. So I think it's a real issue in the Trump campaign, and probably not a positive one.
Hey, so a lot of people are saying that the Republican leadership is kind of to blame for all of this, for flirting with the racist underbelly of America. Would you say that's valid? I kind of have two thoughts on this. One, a lot of this revolves around Reince Priebus, you know, the chairman. I think Reince did the right thing after 2012 to have this sort of analysis, so-called autopsy of the party, which is a very hard thing for any organization, particularly one that you were leading, to be self-critical. And you know, I always thought, whatever it's worth, that once he couldn't stop Trump from running. I don't think that would have been proper. You know, he should be able to run. And once Trump was the nominee de facto, I would have thought Reince would want to step aside and say, you know, I had a vision of where this party should go. It's gone in a completely different direction. I respect that. It's voters, but I'm not the person to lead this party. I think that would have been a big moment for him. I think part of the problem that people have dealing with Trump is this human instinct we have of equating normalcy to other people if you're normal. And we tend to give people the benefit of the doubt more often than not. And we tend to think that, well, like, you must be kidding. And this is sort of, I think, where 1932 analogies are apt. So the sort of unbelievableness of Trump's instability and his lack of knowledge is something that's hard for most people, I think, to fathom. You know, I was around, I'm someone who had dealt with him before, so it's easier for me. But there's also a huge tribal urge in politics. You know, there's a big tribal pull, which I understand. I've done, you know, I fought these wars. You want to be for your side. But I think, you know, I think there's a Trump party and a Republican party. I just don't see where they go together. And I would hope that the people who end up leading the Republican Party are those who, you know, the Jeff Flakes of the world, the John Kasichs, Mitt, who have stood up to Trump. I think Trump understands two things: submission and defiance. And if you submit, he no longer respects you. I mean, that was my experience. And, you know, I said no to Trump a lot, you know, after he endorsed Mitt, which to us was no big deal, probably naively so. But, you know, we were in Nevada. It was a Nevada primary. He actually was well respected as an employer in Nevada when these, you know, kind of polls you see of places you like to work. He endorsed Mitt. We did like 5 of these a day, every day for months, you know. But then he thought he was going to go on the plane with Mitt, and it's like, well, no, you're not going to go on the plane with Mitt. And then he, you know, grandly announced to us that, you know, he would clear his schedule to speak at the convention. It's like, no, you're not going to speak at the convention. But, you know, he never went crazy. He never went out and attacked Mitt, and I think he has a lot of resentment to being told no. But I think he actually had more respect for Mitt for it. We'll see.
Hi. One of the things that you said that I thought was really interesting is that parties not learning organisms. And that's kind of interesting to me because I kind of associate learning with democracy as kind of part of how it kind of putters along. So that's to kind of ask, have parties kind of become like a kind of burden to democracy? Are they kind of an outmoded structure? Are there other kind of compensating institutions or practices that we have that kind of take the place of that? And if so, like kind of how do we kind of move forward from here?
It's a really good question. You know, it also involves a lot of issues around money because ultimately money is a lot about politics. You know, I'm one of the few people around that have done campaigns under the old federal funding system and under the system we have now. I'm in the minority here, but I am a great advocate become a great advocate of federal funding. I would go back to it for all federal races. But we had it for the presidential race, and it worked. And I think it is one of the, I'm not an Obama hater, but I think it's one of the dark legacies of the Obama years that he walked away from federal funding. And people forget this, and they say, well, he had to do it because Citizens United. Citizens United was 2 years later. If you read David Plouffe's book, which is a really good book called Audacity to Win, you know, David's very honest about it. It's like, we did it because we knew we could get away with it. And so, you know, it used to be that when you walked off the stage from accepting a nomination, literally, there was someone there from the Treasury Department who had a certified check. They never would wire it. So I was like, can't we wire it? And they would give you the amount of money that you would have for the campaign. And in agreement to taking that, you agreed not to raise money and not to spend more than that. And the number was around, you know, it rose every year with inflation and every 4 years, but it was around 83 million the last time. So, you know, McCain took federal funding, as every other nominee since Nixon, to post-Watergate reform. And Obama didn't, and Obama ended up spending, you know, 3 times as much money as McCain. And then once, you know, with all these funding reforms, once the genie's out of the bottle, it's hard to put it back. But it's, you know, I think, say, if Bloomberg had run. So Bloomberg, who unlike Trump is really rich, you know, he's worth like over $40 billion now, they say, and he has $11 billion liquid. So, you know, that got pretty far. I wasn't involved in it, but I had friends who were involved in it. And, I mean, they had staff. They've kept it quiet how far it went. He was going to write a $2 billion check. So that would have stood up a lot. Now, they determined, I think correctly, that it would help Trump and hurt Hillary. I think he would have pulled from Hillary more, so he pulled the plug on it, which you have to say is to Bloomberg's credit. But if you had someone who had a lot of money or the ability to raise some money, like Sanders, I think you could stand up an independent party. It's strange. I mean, I never would have thought that the party would go for someone like Trump, because he's so antithetical to everything on so many levels that the party has stood for. And it may be proving that, you know, one more thing, proving that parties are outmoded, or these parties are. I don't know. Anything else? All right. You're entitled.
So, you know, Trump complained off and on about how the system was rigged,
Right.
Wasn't rigged enough to prevent him. But how do you
That was
rig?
for more rigged.
Right. How do you rig the system the next time to prevent demagogues from
Listen,
getting a nomination?
you know, I had a lot of disappointment, verging on disgust with these other candidates, off and on, running against Trump. I think that candidates have to beat candidates. And I think Trump was a very easy candidate. And I think there's sort of two ways to look at Donald Trump. And both are probably true. I mean, one is you say, look, Republicans before have had proven, Democrats do it too, but more flamboyantly recently Republicans, will, in multi-candidate fields, a plurality of voters will vote for an unelectable candidate. So you get Todd Akin in Missouri, Richard Murdoch, Nevada, Sharon Angle. And so that's just what happened with Trump. Now you say, okay, it's never happened before in a national election, but what's a national election but a series of state elections? So maybe it's surprising it hadn't happened. The other is sort of what I would call a Guns of August explanation, that it was this weird, because no one could imagine it happening, it allowed it to happen. And there was this weird confluence of sort of lack of courage, opportunism. I mean, certainly had, you know, Ted Cruz, who say what you will about Cruz, he had credentials as a conservative. If in the first debate he had turned to Donald Trump and said, look, Donald, you may be a lot of things, but let's don't kid ourselves, you're not a conservative. And here's why. And I think you could have defeated him. You know, there's a lot of talk about Mitt Romney running. I can't tell you if Mitt would have won or not. I think it's impossible to calculate. But I can tell you that Mitt would have disassembled Donald Trump. And it, I think, would have been easy to do. He knows nothing. I mean, this is someone, if you had turned to Donald Trump and said, you know, you support the Bill of Rights, right? How many amendments are there? He couldn't have answered. If you said, how does a bill become law? He couldn't have told you. And I think that you could say, well, his supporters don't care about this, but you could have broken Trump. And someone needed to walk out on that stage, and I've been in these debate preps many times, with this mentality that one of us is going to walk off the stage alive. It may be you, it may be me, but we're both not. And I'm going to attack until there's nothing left to attack. And just let it go. And you would have beaten Trump. Now, it could have been a murder-suicide pact, because you have multi-candidates oftentimes, you know, A attacks B, B attacks A, C, D, E, and F benefit. But they should have done it. I think it was a moral failure not to.
So you don't see a need to change the primary rules?
Well, you know, the whole primary system is insane in both parties. You know, it's sort of the law of unintended consequences. So whenever you try to change something, it ends up changing in different ways than you thought. I mean, it happened with the Democrats, you know, with the superdelegates. And I don't have a problem with Iowa and New Hampshire being first in a lot of ways, you know, because they take it seriously. In Iowa, you know, it's a lot more white than most states, or a lot of states, but it has the highest rate of literacy and the lowest personal debt. It's a pretty great combination. But I think it's one of these things that, you know, if you talk about the primary system for 5 minutes, it seems easy to fix. And if you talk about it for 15, it seems impossible. Because every reform, so-called, has a counter-reform. I don't know. You could say we should have national primaries, but then you'd only campaign in big states. You know, there had been sort of this unspoken compact in New Hampshire that if you didn't go and spend a lot of time in New Hampshire, you wouldn't win. And Donald Trump didn't. And I think and he won, and I think that's going to really hurt the New Hampshire primary going forward. It's a mess.
Thank you for your book and for your observations. Briefly, the role of the Tea Party and shifting not just the Republican Party, but the general discourse.
You know, I think the Tea Party, it goes back to this Bernie Sanders thing. You know, the Tea Party very much was a creation of the economic crash. You know, if you go to Tea Party rallies, same as Bernie Sanders rallies, same now as Donald Trump rallies, you don't find many people that don't feel economically stressed. And I think that there was a feeling that this bargain with America had been broken. That what if we believe that always that the future will be better, and that if you work hard and do this, you know, you can have a better life. And then you had the economic crash, and people lost so much, particularly older types who thought that they were secure, that I think it was a shattering event for a lot of people, and they reacted in anger, in the sense that there were these big forces in their lives that they had no control over. So if you look at other periods in American history, like in the late 1800s, there was a lot of turn to religious movements when we had that sense. You know, I think Tea Party, there's a lot of good things about it, because anything that gets people more involved, I'm for. I'm for Rock the Vote. I'm for Bernie. I'm for, you know, American Communist Party. I'm for anything that gets people more involved. And in that sense, it did get some people more involved, and that was positive. I think what's when it becomes negative is when there's too much pandering to it. You know, that's, I mean, Romney was a very odd person to be a nominee in many ways. You think about it, what do we know about the Republican Party? It's increasingly Southern, evangelical, and populist. What do we know about Mitt Romney? You know, none of those three. You know, he's an Ivy League Mormon multimillionaire from Massachusetts. And yet he was able to win. So I think that you can win the primary. I think it can be navigated. But it goes to larger questions of how we consume media and the fact that there's very few honest touchstones now. People tend to consume media to reinforce their opinions rather than inform their opinions. It's certainly true with Fox News. It's true with, it's largely with MSNBC. And I think this is a dangerous trend. I think technology accelerates that because you know how it is that with these logarithms, they determine what you want to see and they feed you that. You know, when you go on the computer, where a lot of us consume information now. And I think that there's all the more need to actively seek opinions that you disagree with. But it's, I think it's very dangerous that what Trump has done is really bless a lot of extremist opinion that should be scorned. Not that people shouldn't be allowed to express this, but it shouldn't be accepted. And I think it's very damaging. I mean, I think when you go out and you call Mexicans rapists, first of all, in the Republican Party, it's probably the death of the party. I mean, if you just pause on that for a second, you know, before '64, Republicans got 30 to 35% of African Americans pretty routinely. Not great, but if you're at 35, you can kind of imagine getting to 40, maybe get to 40, get to 45, you know. So after '64, it fell off the cliff to where it is now. Now in the latest poll, they couldn't find anybody who was African American as for Trump. So, you know, with Bush, we got 40% of Hispanics. Then it went down. Romney got 27%, which was kind of a generic Republican number. He got what they said a generic Republican would get a year before. So it wasn't like the primary hurt Romney, but it didn't help. Obamacare was always been the most popular with Hispanics since its first inception. But anyway, right now Trump is getting 14%. And he's getting 12% in California. And that's important because the last few elections, whatever Hispanic vote was in California, it reflected the national number. No one really knows why. Probably because it's such a large sample, it evens out. So if Trump gets, you know, 12, 13% of Hispanics, and this starts a trend like in '64 with African Americans, we want to elect another Republican for generations. I mean, it's just a fact. Every cycle is 2% less white, and it's the end of the party. And it, you know, you could argue it's deserved if that's what happens. And I don't know how you fix that once that happens. It's not enough to nominate a Hispanic, though that would help. But it's, you know, I think you're going to look up on election night, and Trump is going to be doing worse with non-white voters than any candidate in history since the 19th Amendment or 15th Amendment, both. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate it.